Commander Vethra had been patrolling the Kepler drift for 11 years. He knew every dust cloud, every dead satellite, every slow-turning piece of rock in his sector. He knew where the boundary markers were, big, ugly things Imperial made, gray metal, broadcasting a signal on all frequencies that translated to, "Beyond this point, you are not welcome." He knew what was on the other side of them. Humans. 7 cramped star systems worth of humans, with their loud politics, their incomprehensible food, and their ships that moved like old men walking uphill. He had inspected a human cargo freighter once, years ago. It had taken the thing 4 days to cross the distance between 2 of their own planets. 4 full days. An Imperial courier could do it in 40 minutes. So when his sensor officer said there was something at the boundary, he assumed it was another lost freighter. Humans got lost more often than any species he had ever worked with. It was almost endearing, in the way that a very slow and harmless animal could be endearing. "What class?" he asked, not looking up from his duty report. "Sir," said Dora 6, "I don't have a class for it." He looked up. Dora 6 was a young Keth, barely 3 years out of the academy, small and green-scaled and precise. She ran her scans clean and reported straight. No drama, no guessing. So the expression she was wearing now, the particular look of someone watching a number, refused to change into a sensible number, made him put down his report and walk to her station. He looked at the scan. He looked at it again. "Run it a second time," he said. She ran it. Same result. The object sat at the boundary line, not past it, right at it, as though it had measured the exact point and chosen to stop there. It was cylindrical in rough shape, about the size of a heavy cruiser. The hull material returned no match from any database in the Imperial catalog. The energy output was sitting in the range of a full battle carrier in a hull a quarter of that size, and it had not been there 6 minutes ago. Vethra did the math in his head. He did it twice, because the first answer was impossible, and he wanted to give the universe a chance to correct itself. The second answer was the same. Something had crossed 2 full astronomical units in under 6 minutes. He looked at the image the sensors had pulled. Dark hull, almost black, with a texture that the sensors were struggling to describe in any known material category. Running lights along the spine, white and amber, steady, slow blinking. No visible gun ports, no obvious weapon housings, and along the side, in letters large enough to read from 3,000 kilometers out, a line of text in the human alphabet. His translation program rendered it cleanly. Unsk Iron Meridian. Below that smaller. For Earth and her children. He stood still for a moment. "Get me fleet command," he said. "Right now." Admiral Cosve received the report at 0400, still half asleep, tablet in hand on the edge of her bunk. She read it once, put it down, picked it up again, and read it twice more. She was 42 years into her career in the Imperial fleet. 3 border conflicts, 2 colony suppressions, 1 head-on engagement with a pirate alliance that had been operating in the outer sectors for over a decade. She was not a person who rattled easily. She was rattled. She had her senior staff in the briefing room within the hour. Scan results on the main display. She stood at the front of the room and let them look. Her weapons officer, Hargan of Vreth, big even by Vreth standards, with a career's worth of combat scars, spoke first. Spoofed signal. Someone faking human markings. "The power output is real," said Pellan, the science officer. The Dreth was already running secondary analysis on her personal screen, pulling windows open one after another. A signal can be faked. An energy signature like that cannot. Whatever that ship is running, it is genuinely running it. "Then what are we dealing with?" said Hargan. "I don't know," said Pellan. She said it very flatly, like the words were heavy to hold. And I don't like saying that. Cosve had spent the shuttle ride reviewing the Empire's complete intelligence file on human military development. It was thorough 30 years of surveillance, inspection, informant networks inside human space, satellite observation of every major human facility. It was about as thorough as a document could be. It said, primitive propulsion systems, limited energy weapons, basic kinetic technology, no significant development in the past decade. The file was wrong. Not a little wrong. Completely, catastrophically wrong. "They've been hiding something," she said. Not a question. For years, they've been building something and hiding it. What I need to know is how. No one had an answer yet. We move in, she said. Full group. Slow approach. Shields up, weapons on standby, not active. I don't want to fire the first shot at something I don't understand. Comm line open at all times. She paused and looked around the room. Any questions? Argon looked at the power readings one more time. Then at her. No questions, he said. The 3rd Imperial Battle Group moved in formation dreadnought at the center. Heavy cruisers on the flanks. Frigates spread wide in a screening pattern. 14 ships in total. A force that had made pirate fleets turn and run, and made colonial governments recalculate their options. It was, objectively, the most powerful military presence in this region of space. Cosve stood at her forward viewport and watched the Iron Meridian through the high-resolution scope. The ship had not moved, had not powered anything visible, had not attempted to scan them, as far as their own sensors could tell. It just sat there with its amber running lights blinking slow and steady, like it was breathing. 14 ships coming at you, and it sat there like it had nowhere else to be. She opened the comm channel. Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Cosve of the Galactic Empire's 3rd Battle Group. You are at the protected boundary established by the Treaty of Kepler. Unauthorized presence in this zone is a violation of Imperial law. Identify yourself and state your purpose immediately. Static. Then, clean and unhurried, a voice. Human. Female. Young, not a scared young, but the kind of young that comes with knowing exactly what you are doing. Admiral Cosve, this is Captain Sarah Okafor, commanding the UNSC Iron Meridian. We read you clearly. We've been waiting for your call. Cosve kept her voice even. You are aware you are at a restricted boundary. At it, said Okafor, not past it. We measured carefully. We wanted you to see us, and we wanted you to come out here. And you have. We'd like to have a conversation. About what? About the arrangement, said Okafor. The boundary. The treaty. 40 years of it. We've been thinking, and we'd like to discuss a change. Cosve thought about the power readings. Thought about 6 minutes to cross 2 astronomical units. I think, she said carefully, that a conversation is a good idea. They agreed on a neutral meeting vessel, a small Imperial diplomatic shuttle. Open space, no weapon systems aboard. Cosve brought Pelin and Hargan. She considered a larger delegation and decided against it. More people meant more visible anxiety. She was an admiral. She was absolutely and professionally not anxious. She was simply being very careful. The humans came across in a small transfer pod. 3 of them. 2 in the dark uniform of the United Nations Space Command. She could identify military people by the way they moved through an unfamiliar room, scanning exits, noting positions. And 1 civilian. Old man, gray-haired, wearing a plain dark coat with no markings. He walked in and sat down at the table without waiting to be invited, pulled out a small personal device, and started reading something on it. He looked comfortable, like this was a meeting he had been to 1,000 times. Dr. Emeka Nwosu, he said without looking up. I led the engineering team for the Iron Meridian. 1,200 people over 14 years. I thought it would make sense to have someone here who can answer technical questions directly, rather than having you guess. 14 years. 14 years and the Empire had seen nothing. Cosve sat down. You built it. He looked up then. He had the eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime solving problems that hadn't been solved before, a specific kind of focus. Deep and quiet. He smiled. We built it. A lot of brilliant people gave a lot of years to it. I am very proud of all of them. How? Said Pelin. Not a full question. Just the one word. Nwosu nodded like he had expected exactly that. Let me explain. He talked for 3 hours. The hull composite he called adaptive redistribution armor. The full technical designation was longer and involved several dead Earth languages and some symbols that didn't translate into Imperial notation. The concept came from studying a fungal growth on one of humanity's outer moons, a biological structure that spread kinetic energy through its cellular network, rather than resisting it, so that an impact at any single point was instantly distributed across the whole organism. No one point ever took enough force to be damaged. A materials scientist on the team, Dr. Lu Wei, had spent 11 years reverse engineering the principle into a manufactured composite. The result? A hull that took the energy of a weapon impact and spread it across its entire surface area, dissipating it before any structural damage could occur. A portion of that dissipated energy was captured and recycled into the drive system. In plain terms, said Nwosu, the harder you hit it, the faster it goes. Pelan had stopped moving. The drive system was what Nwosu called an inertia fold. The mathematics, he said, were still being refined, and he would not apologize for that. Some problems took time, but the working principle, by temporarily reclassifying the ship's inertial mass as external to its own reference frame, normal limits on acceleration ceased to apply. A ship that had, effectively, no inertia could reach speeds that standard propulsion physics said were impossible. That is why it took 6 minutes, said Cosve. 6 minutes was us being conservative, said Nwosu. We didn't want to scare anyone more than necessary. Cosve absorbed this. Pelan had not blinked in some time. The weapons, said Cosve. Nwosu smiled. Not today. We came to talk, Admiral, not to threaten. The weapons are real and we'll discuss them eventually, but today we just wanted to be visible. To show you what we are. Captain Okafor leaned forward. She had the same quality of stillness that very good soldiers often had. The kind that meant a lot of decisions had been made and a lot of consequences had been lived through. Admiral, she said, Earth took the boundary in good faith 40 years ago. We held to it. Our people wanted to expand. To move outward, we held them back. We used the time to work. She paused. We're not here to threaten the Empire. We're not here to fight anyone. We're here because we think the arrangement needs to change. And we think we're now in a position to have that conversation as equals. Equals. One word. It landed differently than Cosve expected. She looked across the table at the old engineer and the young captain and the 2 quiet soldiers standing at the back of the room. She thought about 14 years of hidden work. 1,200 engineers. A fungal growth on a distant moon turned into armor that converted weapons fire into fuel. She thought about how long she had spent thinking of humans as small. I need to take this to the Emperor, she said. We expected that, said Okafor. We'll wait. Cosve walked back to her shuttle alone. She sat in the pilot seat for a while, not flying anywhere, just looking through the forward window at the Iron Meridian. Dark hull, steady lights, absolutely still. 14 of her ships outside, and it sat there like it had not noticed them. She picked up the comm and called the Emperor's duty office. The attendant answered on the second tone. I need an emergency audience, said Cosve. Priority Alpha. Tell the Emperor the human situation requires immediate attention. The nature of the situation, Admiral? She kept looking at the ship. The amber lights blinked. Patient. Unhurried. The nature, she said, is that we've been wrong about them for a very long time, and we need to decide what to do about it before they decide for us. She cut the channel. Outside, the Iron Meridian waited. The way something waits when it is not in any hurry, because it knows the result. The Emperor's court was on Veth Prime, the capital world. A planet of white towers and deep-water oceans and 2,000 years of unbroken imperial rule. Nothing had ever threatened it. Nothing had ever come close to threatening it. The idea of a threat to Veth Prime was the kind of thing philosophers discussed as a thought exercise, not something anyone took seriously. Grand Admiral Sorenvel took it seriously now. He sat at the head of the Imperial Strategy Table, a round table. Deliberately round, because the Emperor had once said that in a circle everyone faces inward, and no one can pretend they are not responsible, and he read Admiral Cosve's report from beginning to end, without speaking. When he finished, he read it again. The 30 other officers and ministers around the table waited. He set the report down. Comments, he said. Everyone started talking at once. Sorenvel let them go for about 30 seconds. Then he held up one hand and they stopped, because 40 years of command rank had given him a specific type of silence that he could project like a physical thing. One at a time, he said. Minister Dothran, you first. Minister Dothran was the head of Imperial Intelligence. She was a small, older Veth, gray-skinned and precise, with the kind of face that revealed exactly as much as she wanted it to and nothing more. She had been in intelligence for 35 years. She had built the surveillance network that monitored human space. She had written many of the reports that said humanity was no threat. She looked like someone who had just realized she had been wrong about something for a very long time. The question I keep coming back to, she said, is how? How did they build this ship? In 14 years, in 7 star systems that we were watching, without a single indicator reaching us. That is the correct question, said Sorenvel. The answer I keep arriving at, she said, is that they knew we were watching, and they built around our surveillance. They used systems we weren't monitoring, materials we weren't flagging, supply chains that looked like civilian trade. The rare earth purchases, said someone across the table. A younger officer, Fleet Captain Marinceau, pulling up files on his personal screen. There were unusual purchases of several low-value materials over the last 12 years. We flagged them as minor anomalies. They weren't connected to anything in the threat models. Low value by our standards, said Pellan. She had come with Cosve for the debrief, and she had been sitting at the far end of the table looking like someone who had not slept. The materials for adaptive redistribution composites by themselves, each one is unremarkable. Raw metamaterial precursors, thermal dissipation compounds, structural binding agents, ordinary, individually, together. She paused. Together they're the armor of a ship that cannot be damaged by conventional weapons fire. Silence. Cannot be damaged, repeated Sorenvel. I'm still running the models, said Pellan. But based on what Dr. Nwosu described, and the secondary properties I observed in the hull scan, I believe that is accurate. Standard plasma weaponry, standard kinetic rounds, standard energy lance systems, all of them, would have their impact energy redistributed across the hull and partially recycled into the drive. The ship would not stop. It would not slow. It would accelerate. More silence. Sorenvel looked at the scan data on the main table display. The iron meridian hung there in 3 dimensions, rotating slowly. Dark hull, amber lights. How many ships like this do they have? He said. Everyone looked at Dothren. Dothren looked like she was carrying something heavy. We don't know, she said. Based on what we've reconstructed of the supply chain, the material volumes were consistent with one ship. But the same supply chain deception that hid this ship could have hidden others. We simply do not know. Sorenvel stood up and walked to the viewport. The white spires of Veth Prime stretched below him. The capital, the center of an empire that stretched across 300 star systems, governed 47 species, had stood for 2,000 years. Get me everything, he said. Every trade record, every surveillance feed, every informant report, everything we have on humanity going back 50 years. I want it reviewed from scratch, with new eyes, looking for what we missed. He turned back to the table. And I want to talk to this Captain Okafor myself. The secure channel was established the following day. Sorenvel had reviewed enough of the new intelligence assessments to know that he was not going to win this by projecting strength. That approach required that the other side be uncertain of your strength relative to theirs. Captain Okafor, sitting relaxed in what appeared to be the Iron Meridian's command deck, did not look uncertain about anything. Grand Admiral, she said. Thank you for reaching out directly. Captain Okafor, he said. I want to understand something before we go further. The Iron Meridian, is it one of many? Or is it the only one? She didn't answer immediately. Not hesitation. More like she was deciding how much to say, and in what order. It's the first of its class, she said finally. The first to be commissioned, and the first to be deployed. And the others of its class are in various stages of completion, she said. He absorbed this. How many stages? She smiled. It was a polite smile. Not warm, not cold. Professional. Grand Admiral, we're not here to negotiate from a position of fear. I think we've demonstrated that. The number of ships we have is information we'll share as part of a proper diplomatic process, under proper terms, not as a demand or a threat, as part of a real conversation. You understand, he said, that the Empire does not negotiate from a position of uncertainty. I understand that that has been the Empire's position, she said. I'm suggesting it may need to become more flexible. Sorenvel studied her face through the screen. She was young, not green or careless young in the way that someone who had grown up knowing they were going to do something like this would be young. Prepared, long prepared. What does Earth want? He asked directly. Expansion rights, she said. Freedom of movement through the sectors currently restricted to us. Full diplomatic recognition as a sovereign galactic power. not a protected species. Fair trade access. And a seat at the table when decisions are made that affect our systems. That is a great deal, he said. Yes, she agreed. And we think we've demonstrated that we're in a position to ask for it. Sorenvel ended the call politely and then stood looking at the blank screen for a long time. The intelligence review took 10 days. Dothran's people worked without sleep, pulling records and cross-referencing, following supply chains backward, through third-party traders and shell companies, and civilian transport logs. What they found was both impressive and horrifying, in the specific way that something is horrifying when you realize how obvious it should have been. Humanity had been buying raw materials through 17 different intermediary species, routing purchases through established trading networks that the Empire monitored for obvious threats, weapons components, military propulsion parts, known conflict materials. They had been specifically buying things that did not appear on any threat list. Things that looked like industrial components, research equipment, construction materials. The quantities, accumulated over 12 years, pointed to a manufacturing effort on a scale that required a facility the Empire had not found. Because the facility was not in any of humanity's known 7 systems, it was on a moon in the outer dark, past the mapped boundary, past the Treaty of Kepler line, in a region of space that the Empire's surveys had classified as empty and not worth the fuel to investigate. Humans, evidently, had a different opinion about what was worth investigating. The moon had no name in any Imperial database. Its human designation, once they dug deep enough into the recovered files, was listed simply as Times Foundry 1. There's a Foundry 2, said one of Dothran's analysts, face pale, setting a tablet on the minister's desk. Dothran looked at the file. Yes, she said. Yes, I see that. And, yes, said Dothran. I see all of them. She brought the full report to Sorenvel that evening. He read it, standing up. He sat down halfway through. He finished reading. He put the report on his desk. 5 foundries, he said. 6, said Dothran quietly. We believe Foundry 6 is still under construction, and each one is producing ships of the Iron Meridian class. Yes, at varying rates. We estimate, based on the material volumes and construction timelines we've reconstructed. She paused. She was very controlled, Dothran. 35 years of intelligence work had made her controlled. She was being careful with these words. We estimate that the UNSC currently has between 11 and 19 vessels in operational or near operational condition, in addition to the Iron Meridian. In addition to the Iron Meridian. Sorenvel sat quietly for a moment. We need to know if they have weapons on those ships, he said. Agreed, said Dothran. I've been developing an approach. We could. The alert came through before she could finish. The Iron Meridian had moved. Not far, not past the boundary. It had simply repositioned itself, rotated 40 degrees, and moved approximately 800 kilometers, ending up at a slightly different point along the boundary line. The movement itself was not alarming. What was alarming was that none of the 17 sensor platforms the Empire had positioned to watch it had detected the movement until after it was done. Not during, after. It had moved 800 kilometers, and the sensors had missed it entirely. Sorenvel's tactical command team was going through the playback on a loop when he arrived on the bridge. They had run it 6 times. The result was the same every time. 1 frame. Ship, at position A. Next frame, 0.3 seconds later. Ship, at position B. No transition, no recorded motion, just somewhere else. Is the recording corrupted? He asked. We checked all 17 feeds, said the tactical officer. Independently captured. All show the same gap. The ship moved faster than our sensor refresh rate. Our sensor refresh rate is 0.3 seconds, said Sorenvel. Yes, sir. Sorenvel looked at the display. The Iron Meridian was sitting at its new position, amber lights blinking, utterly still. It moved 800 kilometers in less than 0.3 seconds, he said. Yes, sir. He thought about Admiral Cosvay's report. 6 minutes was us being conservative. We didn't want to scare anyone more than necessary. The comm lit up. Okafor's channel. He answered it. Grand Admiral, she said. She sounded the same as always. Calm. Professional. We noticed your sensor platforms tracking us. We thought a small demonstration of the repositioning capability might save time. You would have asked eventually. Two. He looked at her through the screen. You could have gone anywhere just then. Yes, she said simply. You could have crossed the boundary. You could have come to Veth Prime. We could have, she agreed. We didn't, because we're not here to invade. We're here to talk. But I think it's helpful for everyone to understand what talking means in this context. He held her gaze. She held his without effort. I'll have a formal diplomatic proposal drawn up, he said. Terms for discussion. We'll be ready, she said. He cut the channel, looked at his tactical team, looked at the display. The Iron Meridian. Dark, still, patient. Someone get me Minister Dothran, he said. And get me something for a headache. The room was very quiet. Outside, past the boundary, the ship waited. It was very good at waiting. There was a faction in the Emperor's court that believed the answer was simple. Send more ships. The logic was straightforward, at least from the outside. The Iron Meridian was one vessel, regardless of what it could do. The Empire had thousands of ships, spread across 300 star systems. Numbers, they argued, were the ultimate equalizer. You could build clever armor and fast engines, but you could not build clever armor and fast engines for 1,000 vessels in secret without someone noticing. Therefore, humanity had one exceptional ship and some others under construction, and the Empire had an existing fleet that had kept the peace across the galaxy for 2,000 years. Send the fleet. Make the statement. Let the humans understand the nature of the situation. Grand Admiral Sorenvel listened to this argument for 3 days. He listened to it from fleet admirals and strategy ministers and 2 members of the Emperor's personal council. He listened to it in meetings and in side conversations, and once in a hallway outside the main briefing chamber from a junior official who had apparently decided the Grand Admiral was approachable. He had a lot of patience, Sorenvel. It was one of the reasons he had survived long enough to reach his rank. On the 4th day, he told them his answer. We are not doing that, he said. Grand Admiral, I have read the intelligence assessment. I have reviewed the sensor data from the repositioning event. I have had 3 conversations with Captain Okafor. He looked at the assembled faces around the table. I want to ask everyone here a question. If you send 1,000 ships to that boundary, and the Iron Meridian is still sitting there when they arrive, what do you do next? Nobody answered. Because shooting is the next step, he said. And we do not yet know what happens when you shoot at it. We have a theoretical description from an engineer who was being deliberately incomplete, and we have sensor readings that suggest it converts weapons impact into drive power. If that description is accurate, then firing on it accelerates it. And if it accelerates toward us, at the speeds we have observed it, capable of reaching N, he let them do the math themselves. The room was quiet. We send a fleet, he said, but not to threaten. We send it to negotiate. And we send someone who can negotiate, not someone who will wave ships around and expect that to be enough. He looked at Fleet Admiral Karos 10, the most experienced diplomat in the Imperial military. Karos 10, this one is yours. 2. Fleet Admiral Karos 10 was 70 years old and had negotiated 17 major treaties in his career. He was known for 2 things: an ability to find the position that allowed 2 parties to stop pointing weapons at each other and call it a mutual decision, and an absolute refusal to be rattled by anything, ever, on principle. He was tested on the second quality almost immediately. He arrived at the Kepler Drift with 50 ships. Not the full Imperial fleet, Sorenvel had been clear about that, but 50 heavy-class vessels, enough to represent seriousness without appearing to be a war fleet. They came in standard escort formation, Karos 10's flagship at the center, and they positioned themselves across the boundary line at a respectful distance from the Iron Meridian. The Iron Meridian had not moved. It also, Karos 10 noticed as his sensor team ran their first sweep, appeared to have been joined. How many? He said quietly to his sensor officer. We're still counting, said the officer, who sounded like she was trying not to sound disturbed and was not entirely succeeding. They're harder to track than they should be. The hull material scatters our active scan. She got a number eventually. 9. 9 vessels of the Iron Meridian class, arranged in a loose formation behind the first ship, sitting on the human side of the boundary. Dark hulls, amber lights, all of them still. It looked like a gathering of very large and very patient shadows. Karos 10 looked at the formation for a while. He thought about the intelligence estimate, between 11 and 19 operational vessels. The number 9 was consistent with that range. It meant somewhere between 2 and 10 more were elsewhere, elsewhere being a word that covered a great deal of space and very little certainty. He opened the comm. Captain Okafor, this is Fleet Admiral Karos 10. I've been sent to formalize the diplomatic process your side requested. I appreciate the welcome. Fleet Admiral. Her voice, familiar now from the recordings. Thank you for coming personally. We brought a few colleagues, as you can see. I do see, said Karos 10 pleasantly. I appreciate the transparency. We thought it would save time, she said. Like the repositioning. He almost smiled. She was good. He had negotiated with species who had been spacefaring for 1,000 years, and he had rarely encountered someone this good at saying exactly as much as they wanted to say, and making it feel like generosity. I think, he said, we should meet properly. My ship is comfortable. I'd like to invite you and your people aboard. A pause. We'll come to you, said Okafor. But I'd like to bring Dr. Nwosu and 2 others. Of course. They came in the same small transfer pod. 4 of them this time, Okafor, Nwosu, and 2 others who were introduced as Commander Yuki Adeyemi, the Iron Meridian's tactical officer, and a civilian named Dr. Priya Sharma, identified as the lead theoretical physicist on the Inertia Fold project. Dr. Sharma was young, very young, by the standards of someone who had apparently spent the last decade reclassifying what propulsion physics was allowed to do. She looked around Karos 10's flagship with the unguarded interest of someone who found new ships genuinely exciting, rather than intimidating. He found himself liking her immediately. It was a diplomatic hazard he was used to. They sat around a proper conference table. With food provided, he had been briefed that humans ate a wide variety of things, without particular issue, which made catering straightforward, and Karos 10 opened with the formal position. The Empire recognizes that this conversation is necessary, he said. We are prepared to discuss the terms under which the Treaty of Kepler might be revised. We are willing to consider expanded movement rights for human vessels in certain specified corridors, and to open formal diplomatic channels commensurate with your status as a sovereign people. Okafor listened to all of this with her hands folded on the table. When he finished, she said, That's a starting position. It is, he agreed. We'd like to discuss the end position, she said. Specifically, full movement rights throughout unrestricted imperial space, the same rights enjoyed by any of the 47 member species. Full diplomatic standing, trade access, and a seat on the Galactic Council. Karos 10 kept his expression neutral. The Galactic Council had 47 seats, 1 per member species. A seat required a species to have been a recognized galactic partner for a minimum of 100 years, and to have demonstrated peaceful integration into the imperial community. Humanity had been a known species for 30 years. That, he said, is a significant request. Yes, she said. We know. We also know that the traditional path to that seat takes 100 years, and a history of gradual integration. We're suggesting there may be an alternative path, given the circumstances. The alternative path being that we've already demonstrated we're capable of participating as full partners, said Nwosu gently. He had been quiet until now, working on something on his personal device. He set it down and looked up. The traditional criteria for council membership are roughly technological capability, stable governance, peaceful intent, and the ability to contribute meaningfully to collective galactic problems. We believe we meet all 4. The Empire has its own assessment process for those criteria, said Karos 10. Of course, said Nwosu, but I'd suggest that the assessment process was designed around a set of assumptions that may need updating. He smiled. The same warm smile from Cosve's report. We spent 14 years building quietly in deep space because we were working within a set of rules that were imposed on us. We'd like to work within a set of rules we helped write. Karos 10 looked at him for a long moment. I'll need to bring your proposal back to the Grand Admiral, he said. We expected that, said Okafor. The second part of the meeting was less formal. Food had been eaten. Tea-distributed humans drank an astonishing variety of hot beverages and seemed to find all of them soothing, and the atmosphere had settled into something closer to careful professional respect than initial standoff. Dr. Sharma had been quiet through most of the formal portion. Now she leaned forward slightly. I have a question, she said, in the direct way of someone who spent most of her time thinking about physics and had not entirely mastered the pacing of diplomatic conversation. Your largest vessel's your dreadnoughts. What's the maximum safe acceleration you run them at? Karos 10's own science officer, who had been sitting in on the meeting as a technical observer, blinked. That's proprietary information. Right, sorry, said Sharma, not sounding especially sorry. I was curious because the inertia fold doesn't have a meaningful upper limit the way a standard drive does. We've been testing in the outer systems and we haven't found a point where it stops working. Theoretically, she glanced at Nwosu, who made a small hand gesture that appeared to mean times you can continue. Theoretically, it scales. You put more power in, you go faster. There's no acceleration wall. The Imperial Science Officer looked at her. Then, at Karos 10. Then, back at her. No acceleration wall, he said. Not that we've found, said Sharma. Though we're still exploring the upper range. What is the upper range? That, said Nwosu, pleasantly, is also information we'll share as part of a formal process. Karos 10 made a note. He had a lot of notes by the end of the day. The formal report back to Sorenvel took place over a secure channel that evening. Karos 10 relayed the conversation in full, the requests, the tone, the 9 ships visible on the human side of the boundary, the one thing Dr. Sharma had said about the acceleration wall. Sorenvel listened without interrupting. When Karos 10 was done, there was a pause. No acceleration wall, said Sorenvel. That is what she said Karos 10. She seemed almost casual about it. Another pause. Karos 10, said Sorenvel. In your professional assessment in 40 years of diplomacy, is she bluffing? Karos 10 thought about this seriously. He thought about the 9 ships on the sensor display. He thought about the repositioning event. He thought about Dr. Sharma's expression when she talked about the drive system, not the careful, measured expression of someone delivering a threat, but the genuine, slightly unfocused expression of someone who loved the thing they were talking about and forgot briefly that it was supposed to be strategic. No, he said. I don't think she's bluffing about anything. Silence from Sorenvel's end. Then we need to make a decision, said the Grand Admiral. A real one. Not a temporary stall. Not a show of force. A real decision about what this empire does next. He paused. And I need to talk to the Emperor. That was going to be my recommendation, said Karos 10. I'll go in the morning, said Sorenvel. He sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and everything to do with the weight of understanding that the world had changed while you weren't looking. Keep the channel open with Okafor. Keep the tone friendly. Don't let anything drift toward confrontation. Understood. And Karos 10. Sir, ask them. He stopped. Started again. Ask them, informally, what they plan to do if we say no to everything. Karos 10 thought about that for a moment. And if they tell me? Then, said Sorenvel, I want to know exactly what we're deciding between. He closed the channel. Outside the flagship's viewport, the Iron Meridian and its 8 companions sat in the dark, with their amber lights blinking steady. They had been there all day. They would be there in the morning. They were, it seemed, in absolutely no hurry. Karos 10 sat alone in the conference room where the humans had been sitting a few hours before. One of his staff brought him the evening briefing package. He set it aside without opening it. He had been a diplomat for 40 years. He had sat across from angry species and desperate species and species that were entirely convinced they were right about everything. He had learned to read what people actually wanted underneath what they were saying. What Captain Okafor wanted, underneath everything, was not complicated. She wanted respect, not fear, not submission, not the galaxy on its knees. Just the simple thing that said, you are what you are, and you belong here as much as anyone else does. The hard part was that the Empire had spent 30 years telling humanity the opposite, and now humanity had built 9 ships that could apparently accelerate without limit, with armor that fed on weapons fire, and they were still sitting patiently at the boundary, waiting for a conversation. That, he thought, was either the most disciplined people he had ever encountered, or the most confident. He suspected it was both. There were people in the Empire who could not accept the situation. This was not unusual. In any sufficiently large institution, there were always people who could not accept a situation. The Empire was 2,000 years old and covered 300 star systems, which meant it contained an extraordinary number of people with an extraordinary range of opinions about how the galaxy should work. Most of them expressed those opinions through proper channels, through reports, proposals, council debates, structured dissent. Some of them did not. Admiral Rethman had been commanding the Imperial 9th Strike Fleet for 12 years. He was a warrior, not a diplomat. He had said as much, publicly, many times. He believed the diplomatic approach to the human problem was a mistake. He believed that one ship, regardless of what it could do, was one ship, and that the answer to one ship was always, inevitably, enough ships. He had 40 ships. He was also operating outside his orders. He had convinced himself that this was acceptable, that the situation demanded initiative, that by the time Soren Vellencaros 10 finished talking to the humans, the Empire would have already surrendered its position from a place of strength, and then no amount of ships would matter because the precedent would have been set. You talked to them, you treated them like equals, and once you did that, everyone else in the galaxy who was waiting in their own corner, every species that had ever quietly resented the treaty boundaries, every government that had signed agreements, it didn't, like all of them would understand that talking worked, that the Empire could be moved. He convinced himself he was protecting the Empire. He brought 40 ships to the Kepler drift, coming in from the outer approach, outside the established patrol corridor. He came very fast, and he did not announce himself. Captain Sarah Okafor was in the middle of a meal when the alert hit. She was eating with 3 of her senior officers in the Iron Meridian's small wardroom, a room that existed largely because Dr. Nwosu had insisted, during design, that people needed a place to eat that was not a desk, and they were talking about nothing in particular, the way people do when they are in the middle of something significant and need an hour away from it. The alert was clean and direct, the way all alerts on the Iron Meridian were designed to be. No alarms, no flashing lights, a tone, and then a voice. Captain, unidentified fleet inbound from bearing 270, outer approach. 40 vessels. No IFF signal, no hail. Speed and trajectory suggest intercept course. 2. She put down her food. Time to intercept? 8 minutes, at current speed. Battle stations, she said, and hail Fleet Admiral Karos 10. She was in the command center in 90 seconds. The display had the incoming formation mapped 40 Imperial vessels, attack spread, weapons hot. The sensor readings were very clear about the weapons hot part. No ambiguity there. Karos 10 came on the channel, and she had never seen a diplomat look the way he looked now. He looked like a man watching a fire he had been working for days to prevent suddenly start anyway. Captain Okafor, I want you to know that this is not authorized, he said. The words came out controlled and precise, each one careful. This is not the Grand Admiral's decision. I am attempting to reach Admiral Rethman directly. I understand, she said. We're not going to fire first. I am glad to hear that, he said. Then, after a breath, are your ships able to not be hit? She said. Yes, we'll be fine. She looked at her tactical display, her 9 ships, and Rethman's 40. Try to reach him, Fleet Admiral. She cut back to her own crew. Commander Adeyemi was already at the tactical station. Formation? Defensive spread, said Okafor. Bring the others up to flank positions but nothing forward. We wait. If they fire, we deal with it, she said. But we do not fire first. Rethman's 40 ships came in fast and swept into an attack envelope around the human formation. He had positioned his fleet in a standard encirclement pattern, 8 ships above, 8 below. The rest spread in a wide arc to cut off retreat. It was the pattern that had ended the northern border conflict 12 years ago, and it was extremely effective at communicating the message that the situation was no longer a negotiation. He had not announced himself because he did not want to negotiate. He opened the channel himself, finally, when he was in position. Human vessels, he said. This is Admiral Rethman of the Imperial 9th Strike Fleet. You are in violation of the Treaty of Kepler. You will withdraw to your own space immediately, or I will consider your presence an act of aggression and respond accordingly. He waited. The reply came from the Iron Meridian. Captain Okafor's voice, the same as it was in every recording, calm, professional, not frightened at all. Admiral Rethman. This is Captain Okafor. We have been invited to this location by the Empire's diplomatic representatives. to conduct formal negotiations, authorized by Grand Admiral Soren Vel. We are not in violation of the treaty. We will not withdraw. Your invitation, said Rethmon, does not interest me. A pause. I see, said Okafor. Then, I want to be very clear about something before you make any decisions. We have not fired on any Imperial vessel. We have not crossed your boundary. We have been conducting ourselves in complete good faith throughout this process. Whatever happens next is entirely your decision. My decision, he said, is that you leave. We will not, she said. He opened the firing order. The plasma broadside from 40 ships hit the human formation in a wave. It was a coordinated volley. Rethmon's tactical team was experienced, and they understood how to run a simultaneous broadside properly. All 40 ships fired in the same firing window, targeting the same 3 vessels at the front of the human formation. Enough concentrated firepower to reduce a standard heavy cruiser to debris in under 30 seconds. The sensors recorded what happened next with perfect clarity. Because the sensor recording was the only way anyone would believe it. The plasma impacted the hull of the 3 lead vessels. The energy dispersed across the hull surface, exactly as Dr. Nwosu had described, spreading out and dissipating. No hull breach, no hull damage at all. The ships did not shudder, they did not slow, they moved, not retreating, forward. The 3 lead vessels accelerated directly through the plasma fire and into the center of Rethmon's formation so fast that the Imperial ships barely had time to scatter before the humans were inside the perimeter. Inside meaning past the point where Rethmon's outer ships could fire without risking their own fleet. It had taken approximately 4 seconds. The remaining 6 human vessels repositioned simultaneously, the repositioning that the Empire's sensors had seen before, faster than the sensor refresh rate, ships appearing at new positions without any recorded motion between them. They were at the flanks of Rethmon's formation before his outer ships could complete a turn. And then everything stopped. The Iron Meridian was 300 kilometers from Rethmon's flagship, close enough that it filled the forward viewport. Dark hull, amber lights, completely undamaged. It had not fired a single weapon. Admiral Rethmon, said Okafor's voice, I would like to try this again. My ships are in a position where I could end this engagement in approximately 15 seconds. I am not doing that. I am still here to negotiate. I would very much like to continue negotiating. Rethmon sat in his command chair and looked at the Iron Meridian filling his viewport. He thought about the 40 ships he had brought. He thought about the weapons' hot status. He thought about the broadside that had hit 3 human ships and done nothing had, apparently, made them faster. He thought about the 6 ships that had repositioned without being tracked. Hold fire, he said to his fleet. Then, to the channel, Captain Okafor. Admiral. What? He said carefully. Are your weapons systems? She told him. Not everything, but enough. The primary weapons system on the Iron Meridian class was what Dr. Sharma had named a kinetic lance. A projectile accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light by the same inertia fold drive that moved the ship. The projectile was small, a cylinder of dense material, roughly the length of a human arm, with no explosive component. It did not need one. An object, the mass of an arm-length cylinder moving at a fraction of the speed of light, carried the kinetic energy of a small nuclear device on impact. It was, Okafor explained, accurate to within 2 meters at any range the ship could target, which was effectively any range, given the drive system. We have 40 launchers per ship, she said. We have 9 ships at this location. The mathematics were available to anyone who wanted to do them. We haven't fired any of them, she said. I noticed, said Rethmon. His voice was flat. Not emotional, he was a warrior and he was not going to give her emotional, but flat in the specific way of a man recalculating something very important. I want to be honest with you about why, she said. We could end this engagement and we have chosen not to, because this is not what we came here for. We didn't build the Iron Meridian class to fight the Empire. We built it because we needed the capability before we could have the conversation. Do you understand what I mean? 2. He did. He was a warrior. He understood capability and conversation. You needed to prove the ships existed before anyone would take you seriously, he said. We needed to prove that we were not asking for permission, she said. We were informing. There is a difference. A long quiet. I'll contact Grand Admiral Soren Vel, said Rethmon. Thank you, she said. I'll be here. The call between Rethman and Sorenvel lasted 27 minutes. The content of that call was never officially released. What was known was the outcome. Rethman's fleet stood down and withdrew to a position 80,000 kilometers from the human formation. Rethman himself was relieved of command pending an inquiry, which would later result in a permanent reduction in rank and an early retirement. Karos 10, who had spent the entire engagement trying to reach Rethman on a channel the Admiral was not answering, spent a long time afterward sitting in the diplomatic suite doing nothing. His staff gave him the space. They were good staff. Eventually, he called Okafor. "Captain," he said, "I owe you an apology on behalf of the Empire." "You don't," she said. "You didn't order it." "No," he said, "but I'm saying it anyway." She looked at him through the screen. Something in her expression shifted, not soft, not hard, just the look of a person acknowledging something real. "We're still here to negotiate," she said. "I know," said Karos 10. "So am I." He leaned forward. "I need to ask you something, and I'd like a real answer." "Ask." "When Rethman fired on your ships," he said, "what were your orders? If your ships could move the way they moved, and your weapons are what you described, what were you actually authorized to do in response?" "Pals, I was authorized to defend my ships and my crew," she said, "and to avoid lethal engagement if at all possible. And if it hadn't been possible," she looked at him steadily, "then I would have done what was necessary to keep my people alive," she said, "and we would have had a very different conversation afterward." He nodded slowly. "I think," he said, "that the Emperor needs to hear from you directly, not through reports, not through me. Directly." "We're ready for that," said Okafor. "Whenever you are." Outside, the Iron Meridian floated in the dark with its lights steady and its hull unmarked. Every plasma impact from 40 ships having left no trace at all. Clean. Patient. Completely, terribly, unharmed. The amber lights blinked. 1-2. 1-2. Like a clock that had all the time in the world. The Emperor of the Galactic Empire was named Warship III. He was 114 years old, which for a Veth was late middle age. He had ruled for 61 years. He had inherited an empire that covered 280 star systems and had expanded it to 300 without fighting a single significant war, not because he was weak, but because he understood that wars were expensive in ways that went far beyond ships and soldiers. They were expensive in trust, in stability, in the long, slow work of keeping 47 species pointed in roughly the same direction at roughly the same time. He was, by any serious assessment, a very good emperor. He was also the kind of person who, when presented with new information, processed it fully before responding. His staff called this quality, patience. His enemies, over the decades, had called it other things. The result was the same. He did not panic. He did not react. And he did not make decisions that he would need to unmake later. He read Admiral Kosve's report. He read Dothran's intelligence assessment. He read Karos 10's diplomatic notes. He read the full sensor logs from the Rethman engagement, including the recording of the 40-ship broadside hitting 3 human vessels and the 3 human vessels accelerating into the middle of his fleet without a scratch. He read all of it in one sitting, in his private study, with no staff present. Then he sat alone for a while. Then he told his attendant to arrange a call with Captain Sarah Okafor. The channel opened at 0900 Veth prime time. The Emperor sat at his personal desk rather than the formal throne room display, which was itself a decision, a deliberate one. The kind that said, "Times this is a conversation, not an audience." He had thought about that choice for a while before making it. On the screen, Okafor sat in what appeared to be the same command deck she had used for every previous call. She was in uniform, back straight, but her expression was not the tightly controlled professional face she had given to Kosve and Sorenvel. This was something closer to the way a person looks when they finally get to a meeting they have been preparing for a very long time. "Captain Okafor," said the Emperor. "Emperor Vorsail," she said. He let the silence sit for a moment. Not uncomfortable, just real. "I have reviewed everything," he said. "The ships, the technology, the engagement with Admiral Rethman. I want to begin by telling you that Rethman acted outside his orders and that his actions are not representative of the Empire's position." "I understand that," she said. Fleet Admiral Karos 10 made that very clear. Good. He folded his hands. I also want to tell you that the Empire's intelligence regarding your capabilities was wrong, that we should have known sooner, and that the 40 years of restricted movement under the Treaty of Kepler were based in part on an assessment of your development that was not accurate. I am not apologizing for the treaty. It was made in good faith with the information available. But I am acknowledging that the information was wrong. Okafor was quiet for a moment. He had the sense that this was not something she had expected first. Thank you, she said. That means something. I want to understand something, he said. You had the capability, at multiple points in the last week, to take a very different kind of action. You could have crossed the boundary. You could have responded to Rethmon's attack with force. You chose not to. I want to know why. She held his gaze through the screen. She was younger than he had expected, not in years, but in the way that certain people are young regardless of age. Focused. Direct. Not impressed by power for its own sake. Because we didn't build those ships to fight you, she said. We built them so we'd never have to. He looked at her. Explain that. 40 years ago, she said, Earth signed the Treaty of Kepler because we had no alternative. We were new to the galaxy. We were small, and the Empire was enormous. The treaty put us in a box, and we accepted the box because fighting over the box was a losing proposition. She paused. But the thing about humans is that we don't stay in boxes. We work on the box. We spend 14 years building outside the box, quietly, until the box is no longer relevant. The foundries, said the Emperor. 6 of them, she said simply. We weren't hiding because we were planning something hostile. We were hiding because we knew that if the Empire saw us building early, there would be pressure to stop us, and we needed to not be stopped. And now you're not in the box, he said. Now we're not in the box, she agreed. And we still don't want to fight you. That has never been the goal. The goal is simple. Be seen as what we are. Not a protected species. Not a minor civilization in a restricted corner of the galaxy. A people with the same right to be here as anyone else. The Emperor was quiet for a moment. He looked at his desk, at the reports piled there, at 61 years of decisions large and small. Then he looked back at the screen. What you're asking for, he said, is council membership. A formal seat. Yes, the council has criteria, which we meet, she said. Firm, not aggressive. I know the traditional timeline is 100 years. I know the integration process is long. I'm asking you to look at what we've demonstrated and tell me honestly whether the criteria are really about time or whether they're about capability, governance, and peaceful intent. He thought about the 40-ship broadside, the undamaged hull, the ships that had moved inside the Imperial formation without firing a single weapon. He thought about the fact that they had sat at the boundary, patiently, for a week, waiting for a call. The traditional process exists for good reasons, he said. It ensures stability. It ensures that a new member species has time to integrate, to build relationships, to be known by the other members, before they have formal power. I understand, she said. We're not asking to skip the relationships. We're asking for the formal recognition to start building them as equals. There is a difference between an entity that attends as a guest and an entity that sits at the table. Yes, he said quietly. There is. The call lasted 2 hours. When it ended, the Emperor sat in his study for a long time, not doing nothing, thinking, which for Vorsail III was not the same thing as doing nothing. It was the most active thing he did. He thought about the history of the Council. He thought about how it had been formed, species by species, over 2,000 years. He thought about the arguments against bringing humanity and the disruption to existing relationships, the symbolic value of the precedent, the fact that other species waiting for their own recognition would point to this and say times, why not us? He thought about those arguments and he found them reasonable. He also thought about the recordings of the Iron Meridian absorbing a 40-ship broadside and accelerating into the middle of the Imperial formation. He thought about the 6 foundries. He thought about the fact that Dr. Sharma, a physicist in her early 30s, had apparently removed the upper limit from what a propulsion system was allowed to do. And he thought about the most important thing, which was a question Karos 10 had put in his final report, almost as a side note, a quiet thing buried at the end of a paragraph. These people had the capacity for a very different kind of approach and chose not to take it. That choice tells us more about them than any technical assessment. The 2000, he called his senior council minister. Arrange a full council session, he said, in 30 days. Agenda item: the formal status of the human species and the question of treaty revision. Sir, the formal petition process for council. I know what the process is, he said. I'm the one who needs to make the case. Schedule it. The 30 days were busy ones. Karos 10 began the formal diplomatic process documents, terms, the careful architecture of an agreement that would need to satisfy 47 existing council members before it could satisfy anyone on Earth. It was his best work, he would say. Later, 40 years of practice distilled into 30 days of very long hours and very strong tea. Dothran's intelligence division began a full structural review of the Empire's surveillance network. The question of how they had missed 6 foundries was one that needed a real answer, not a political one. She found the answer, eventually. It was not flattering. The network had been designed around known threat models, which meant it had been designed around what the Empire already expected to find. Anything that fell outside the expected categories had been systematically underweighted. The humans had not broken the surveillance system. They had simply built something the system was not looking for. She rewrote the threat assessment criteria from scratch. It took a long time and it was very uncomfortable work, and it was the most important thing her department did in a decade. Admiral Kosvei, who had been the first Imperial officer to face the Iron Meridian, and had responded to it by picking up the comm instead of picking up a weapon, was quietly promoted, and, at the Kepler Drift, 9 Iron Meridian-class vessels and 1 Imperial diplomatic fleet spent 30 days in careful proximity, sharing meals and technical briefings and long conversations about what the galaxy looked like from very different positions. Commander Adeyemi, who had a history with small craft racing, found that Karos 10's navigation officer had similar interests. They talked for 6 hours one evening about the physics of tight turns under various drive systems. Dr. Sharma and the Imperial Science officer who had heard her describe the inertia fold ran 3 joint simulations that neither of them had clearance to run yet, but that both of them agreed were too interesting to wait on. Nwosu, who was 71 years old and had spent 14 years in a manufacturing facility on a moon with no name, slept 12 hours a night and said it was the best sleep he had had in a decade. Okafor spent a lot of the 30 days on the comms. Earth was watching everything closely. There were people at home who were worried. There were people at home who were furious at the Reth-Man engagement and wanted a much harder response than Okafor was giving. There were people who thought the whole diplomatic process was naive. There were people who wanted to know why she hadn't just crossed the boundary and dared them to do something about it. She answered all of these people the same way, in different words that came down to the same thing. Because we are not here to win a fight. We are here to end the need for one. The council session was on a world called Maris Neutral Ground, a planet with no native intelligent species, chosen 1,000 years ago specifically as a place where the 47 member species could gather without any of them feeling they were meeting on someone else's territory. Okafor came with Nwosu and Adeyemi and Dr. Sharma and 7 other members of Earth's diplomatic team. She wore the UNSC dress uniform, dark, clean, the small patch on the shoulder showing Earth from space, blue and white and improbably small for a planet that had produced people like the ones in this room. She sat in the observers section and watched Karos 10 make the case. He was good. 40 years of it. And he was very good. He laid out the history cleanly, the treaty, the 40 years, the foundries, the capabilities, and he did not soften any of it. He told the council exactly what the Iron Meridian could do. He told them about the broadside. He told them about the repositioning. He told them about the fact that humanity had been watching and building and waiting for 30 years and had not, at any point, done anything with that capability, except sit at the boundary and ask for a conversation. The criteria for council membership, he said in closing, have always been about character as much as capability. We ask whether a species can be a stable and constructive partner. I would ask the council to consider the last 30 days as the most direct possible demonstration of that question's answer. The debate lasted 4 hours. The vote was not unanimous. 11 members voted against. Their reasons were not unreasonable. Precedent, timeline, The disruption to established processes, reasonable concerns, raised by reasonable people. 36 members voted yes. Okafor did not cry when the vote came through. She had grown up knowing this day might happen. She had spent years working toward it. She had sat at the Kepler drift for a week and watched 40 ships fire on hers and made herself stay still and patient and professional. She had made herself stay inside the boundary when everything in her wanted to say, "Times you cannot keep us here, times, and cross it." She had done all of this, and she was not going to cry in the council chamber on Maris in front of 47 species. She squeezed Nwosu's hand once, briefly, under the table. He squeezed back. Outside, she called Earth. The call went through to the UN Secretary General's office. And then, because the Secretary General was a practical person who understood the weight of moments, it was opened on a public channel that was already broadcasting across all 7 human systems. "It's done," she said. She didn't need to say more. The people watching already knew what it was. The Iron Meridian left the Kepler drift 3 days later, heading home. Before it went, Karos 10 came across in the small transfer pod for one last meeting. Not formal. He brought nothing official. No documents. No agenda. He brought food, veth, travel bread, dense and gray and not very attractive, which he acknowledged freely, and he sat in the wardroom that Nwosu had insisted on, including in the design, and he drank the very strong tea that Adeyemi made, and they talked for an hour about nothing important. At the end of it, standing at the transfer pod hatch to go, he turned back. "I want to ask you something," he said to Okafor. "Personally, not diplomatically." "Ask," she said. "What made you sure we'd say yes? That we wouldn't just decide the easier answer was to remove the problem?" She looked at him for a moment. "We weren't sure," she said. "We hoped." He thought about that. 40 years of work, he said. 14 years of building. 6 foundries. And you were hoping. "We believed in the argument," she said. "We believed that if we showed up with capability and chose not to use it, the argument would be visible. That the choice to wait, to talk, to stay at the boundary, that it would say something louder than the ships did." She paused. "We hoped it would be enough." He nodded slowly. "It was," he said. He went back to his fleet. The Iron Meridian crossed the Kepler drift on the way home through it, not at it, past the boundary markers, through the restricted space that was no longer restricted, out the other side, and into the open lanes that ran between the stars. It moved at a fraction of what it could do. No reason to rush. The amber lights blinked steady in the dark, the hull perfect and unmarked, the drive running quiet. Behind it,